A blizzard roars through the Colorado mountains when two tiny black twins stumble out of the storm, barefoot, freezing, begging a lonely mountain man for help. He lifts his lantern, and the moment he hears their trembling hymn, he bursts into tears. They don't know why he's crying. They only know their mama said, "Find the man in the mountains, he'll keep you safe." But when he opens their worn Bible, a letter from his dead wife falls out, written years before the girls were even born. Now, the mountains whisper secrets he's not ready to face, and the railroad men down below are hunting for something buried in those hills, something tied to his own name. In a land where mercy can get you killed and justice wears a badge of greed, this broken man must decide, protect the innocent or save his own soul. Snow's coming, guns are waiting, and a hymn echoes through the dark. Who are these twins, and what truth will break the mountain man's heart before dawn? Drop a comment below, and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The winter wind howled through the San Juan Mountains like a hungry wolf, whipping snow into stinging clouds. Lewis Pike adjusted the rope around his chest, leaning forward as he dragged his loaded wood sled through knee-deep drifts. His breaths came out in white puffs, freezing in his graying beard. The afternoon sun was already sinking behind the jagged peaks, painting the snow-laden pines in amber and shadow. "Best get on," he muttered to himself, his voice rough from disuse. Living alone these past 5 years had taught him the importance of beating nightfall. The temperature would drop fierce once darkness settled in. The wind died down for a moment, and that's when he heard it, so faint he thought his mind was playing tricks. A child's voice, thin and wavering, carried on the bitter air. "Jesus loves me, this I know." Luis stopped dead in his tracks. The hymn struck him like a physical blow. Sarah, his wife, used to hum that very tune while tending her garden or mending his shirts. But Sarah was long buried on the gentle slope behind their cabin, and no child had ever ventured this far into his mountain sanctuary. "For the Bible tells me so." The voice was clearer now. Luis dropped the sled rope and turned in a slow circle, scanning the white landscape. There, beneath a massive fallen pine, half buried in snow, he caught a flash of movement. "Little ones to him belong." His long strides ate up the distance. As he drew closer, his heart nearly stopped. Two tiny figures huddled together under the fallen tree, their dark faces stark against the snow. Twin girls, no more than 7 or 8 years old, wearing thin cotton dresses wholly unsuited for the mountain winter. Their bare feet were blue with cold. "Dear Lord above," Luis breathed, dropping to his knees beside them. One girl, the singer, opened her eyes at his approach. Despite her condition, a smile touched her cracked lips. "Mama said," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Said the man in the mountains would help." The other twin stirred weakly, pressing closer to her sister. Luis didn't waste another moment. He shrugged out of his heavy buffalo robe and wrapped it around both children. Their bodies were frighteningly cold. "Where's your mama?" he asked, though something in his gut already knew the answer. The singing girl, he'd later learn was Annie, pointed vaguely back down the trail before her hand fell limply. "She got real tired," the quieter twin, Lila, murmured. "Told us to keep walking toward the smoke we saw. Said to sing so angels could find us." Luis's throat tightened. He gathered both girls into his arms, their slight weight barely a burden to his strong frame. "I've got you now," he said gruffly, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Got a warm cabin just over that ridge." The trek back seemed endless. Luis left his wood sled where it lay. He could retrieve it tomorrow. The girls had fallen silent, and he could feel them shivering violently against his chest. He spoke to them constantly, something he hadn't done in years, telling them about his cabin, about the soup he'd warm for them, anything to keep them conscious. When they finally reached his home, Luis kicked the door open with more force than necessary. The cabin was cold and dark, but he'd banked the morning's fire well. Still holding the girls with one arm, he stirred the embers and fed kindling into the cast-iron stove until flames licked hungrily at the dry wood. He laid the twins gently on his bed, piling every blanket he owned around them. Their eyes were closed, but he could see their chests rising and falling with shallow breaths. Working quickly, Luis filled a pot with snow and set it on the stove to melt. He found Sarah's old wool stockings in the trunk he'd never had the heart to empty, and carefully wrapped the girls' frozen feet. When the water was hot, he added dried meat and the last of his preserved vegetables to make a simple broth. The smell seemed to rouse the twins slightly. Luis sat on the edge of the bed, carefully spooning the warm liquid between their lips. "That's it," he encouraged softly when Annie managed to swallow. "Just a little more." Lila turned her face away at first, but her sister's weak voice coaxed her to take some broth as well. As the cabin slowly warmed and the girls began to show more signs of life, Luis's mind raced. Their mother was out there somewhere, likely already claimed by the bitter cold. These children had been sent to him, sent with a hymn that Sarah had loved, the same hymn that had led him to find them before the storm could take them too. The quiet twin, Lila, reached out and touched his rough hand with fingers that were finally beginning to warm. "Thank you," she whispered, her dark eyes full of trust that broke something loose inside him. Luis turned away quickly, but not before the girls saw the tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. He hadn't cried since Sarah's passing, hadn't allowed himself that release. But now the tears came freely as he tended the fire, its light dancing across the cabin walls while behind him, Annie's weak voice began to hum their mother's hymn once more. The wind outside grew fiercer as night fell, rattling the cabin's sturdy logs. But inside, 3 lost souls had found each other, brought together by a song of love and faith that bridged the distance between earth and heaven. Luis watched over the sleeping twins, his heart cracking open to let in something he'd thought was forever lost. Hope and the chance to help these little ones just as their mother had promised he would. He picked up Sarah's old Bible from the shelf where it had gathered dust these 5 years. Opening it carefully, he read by lamplight, his voice barely a whisper. "Suffer the little children to come unto me." Outside, the storm raged on. But in that moment, Luis Pike knew with certainty that this night would change everything, for him and for the 2 small angels who had sung their way into his lonely world. The hymn that had led him to them echoed in his memory, mingling with Sarah's voice from long ago. His wife had always said God worked in mysterious ways. Looking at the sleeping twins, Luis reckoned she'd been right about that, like she'd been right about so many things. He settled into his chair by the stove, knowing sleep wouldn't come. There would be hard days ahead, a mother to find and lay to rest, authorities to notify, decisions to make. But for now, his task was simple. Keep these little ones warm and safe through the night. The rest would come in its own time, guided by the same hand that had led them to his door with a song he could never forget. The lamplight flickered, casting soft shadows on the sleeping faces of Annie and Lila Turner. Luis Pike kept his vigil, his heart fuller than it had been in years, as the winter storm wrapped its white blanket around his cabin and the precious souls it now sheltered. Dawn crept over the San Juan Mountains, painting the snow-laden pines in soft golden light. The storm had spent its fury through the night, leaving behind a profound stillness that seemed to wrap the world in cotton. Inside the cabin, Louis Pike stirred from his vigil by the stove, his joints stiff from sitting in the wooden chair all night. The twins still slept soundly in his bed, their small forms barely making hills beneath the pile of quilts. Louis added wood to the dying embers, watching as flames licked up around the fresh logs. The familiar task gave his hands something to do, while his mind wrestled with all that had happened. He filled his largest pot with clean snow and set it to melt on the stove. The girl's feet would need tending. He'd seen enough mountain winters to know the dangers of frostbite. As the water warmed, he gathered what supplies he could find: clean rags, a jar of bear grease salve he'd made last spring, and Sarah's old wool stockings. Annie woke first, her eyes taking in the unfamiliar cabin before finding Louis. "Mornin', sir," she whispered, careful not to wake her sister. Even after all she'd been through, there was something bright and brave in her gaze that reminded Louis of summer sunshine. "Morning, little one," he replied softly. "How are your feet feeling?" Annie's face scrunched up as she tried to wiggle her toes. "Can't feel them much," she admitted. Louis nodded gravely. "That's what I figured. Got some warm water here to help with that. Might hurt some when the feeling comes back, but it needs doing." He carried the pot of warm water to the bedside, along with a basin to catch the runoff. As he began to unwrap the makeshift bandages from the night before, Lila stirred and woke, her dark eyes wide with momentary fear before she remembered where she was. "It's all right," Annie soothed, reaching for her sister's hand. "The mountain man's helping us, like Mama said he would." Louisa's hands stilled for a moment. "Your mama told you about me?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Annie shook her head. "Not by name. She just said there was a good man who lived up in these mountains, and if we ever needed help, we should look for his cabin smoke." Lila nodded, adding in her quiet voice, "She said angels would guide us." Louis had to look away, blinking hard. He focused on gently lowering Annie's feet into the warm water. She gasped at first, then relaxed as he carefully began to wash away the dirt and examine the damage. The skin was angry red in places, but he found no black spots that would signal serious frostbite. "Where did you girls come from?" he asked as he worked, trying to keep their minds off any discomfort. "Might be I know the place." The twins exchanged a glance before Annie spoke. "We lived by the Red Ridge, near the railroad tracks." Her voice grew softer. "But bad men came. Mama said we had to leave in the night." Louis's jaw tightened, but he kept his movements gentle as he dried Annie's feet and started applying the salve. He knew of the Red Ridge. It was a good 3 days' walk from his cabin in good weather. That these little ones had made it so far in a storm seemed nothing short of miraculous. "You carried anything with you?" he asked, wrapping Annie's feet in fresh cloth before turning to tend to Lila's. "Just Mama's Bible," Lila said. "It's special. She read to us from it every night." Annie pointed to where their sodden belongings lay near the stove. Louis saw a leather-bound book among the fabric, its covers warped from snow but still intact. Once he finished wrapping Lila's feet, he retrieved it for them. The twins handled the Bible with reverence, their small fingers tracing the worn leather. As Annie opened it, a folded paper slipped from between its pages, falling to the floor. Louis picked it up, and his heart nearly stopped. He knew that handwriting, would know it anywhere. Sarah's neat, careful letters spelled out, "To the children who find this book." His hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. The twins watched him curiously as he began to read. "My dearest children, if you are reading this, then God has answered my prayers in ways I might never know. During the war, I served as a nurse in a field hospital, One night, they brought in a young mother who didn't survive her wounds. Her tiny baby girl had no one left in the world. For 3 days and nights, I cared for that precious child until her aunt could come claim her. Those 3 days changed my heart forever. I prayed then that God would someday bring that child, or others who needed love just as much, back into our lives. My husband Luis has so much love to give, though grief has made him forget this truth about himself. If you have found this letter, then you have also found him. Trust in his gentle heart. Let him care for you as I know he can. And Luis, my love, if you are reading these words, remember that love is stronger than loss. God has not forgotten you. With eternal hope, Sarah Pike. Luis's voice broke on the last words. He looked up to find both girls watching him intently, their eyes shining with tears that matched his own. "Your wife wrote that?" Annie asked softly. Luis nodded, unable to speak. The cabin seemed suddenly full of Sarah's presence, in the Bible, in the wool stockings warming tiny feet, in the very air around them. He could almost hear her gentle laugh, feel her hand on his shoulder. Lila reached out and touched his arm. "She must have been real nice," she said simply. "She was," Luis managed. "Nicest person I ever knew." He carefully folded the letter and handed it back to the girls, who reverently placed it in the Bible. That evening, after feeding the twins a hearty soup and making sure they were warm and comfortable, Luis stepped outside onto his porch. The night was crystal clear, stars burning like diamonds in the black sky. For the first time in 5 years, he felt Sarah's loss not as an open wound, but as a guiding light that had led these children to his door. He removed his hat, bowed his head, and began to pray aloud. His voice was rusty with disuse, but gained strength as he spoke. "Lord, I ain't been much for talking to you since Sarah passed. Been angry and lost, but seems you ain't given up on me yet. These little ones need help, and Sarah, she knew. Somehow she knew they'd come. Help me be the man she believed I could be. Help me keep these children safe. Amen." Inside, he could hear Annie humming softly, that same hymn that had led him to them in the storm. Luis stood a moment longer under the stars, feeling something warm and alive unfurling in his heart, where grief had reigned so long. Then he went back inside to tend his fire and watch over the precious souls entrusted to his care. The letter from Sarah lay on the table. Beside her Bible, a bridge between past and present, loss and love, darkness and dawn. In the soft lamplight, Luis could almost see his wife's smile in the peaceful faces of the sleeping twins. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, this was enough. This quiet cabin, these innocent hearts, and the love that had led them all home. Morning light filtered through the cabin's frosted windows, casting pale squares on the rough-hewn floor. Luis stirred the cornmeal into the bubbling pot, watching the yellow powder thicken into proper mush. Behind him, 2 sets of small feet shuffled across the planks. "Smells good," Annie said, pulling herself onto a chair while helping Lila up beside her. Their feet, still wrapped in clean bandages, dangled well above the floor. "Ain't fancy," Luis said, spooning the steaming mush into wooden bowls. "But it'll stick to your ribs." He added a drizzle of precious honey to each portion, watching the golden sweetness sink into the warm cornmeal. The girl's eyes widened at the sight. "Mama used to make this on special days," Lila whispered, carefully lifting her spoon. Luis cleared his throat against the tightness there. "Reckon today's special enough." He set a cup of warm milk beside each bowl, then settled into his own chair with a mug of coffee. Outside, the storm had finally spent itself. Brilliant sunshine sparkled across the pristine snow, and the wind had gentled to barely a whisper through the pines. Luis watched the twins eat, noting how they took small, careful bites despite their obvious hunger. Sarah would have appreciated their manners, he thought. "Your feet feeling any better?" he asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Annie nodded, wiggling her toes beneath the bandages. "Don't hurt so much now." "Still can't walk proper, though," Lila added softly. "That'll come," Luis assured them. "Meanwhile, thought you might like to meet Chester. He's my old mule. Gentlest creature you'll ever know, lest you try to rush him somewhere he don't want to go." The suggestion brought the first real smiles he'd seen on their faces. After breakfast, Luis wrapped them both in warm shawls, Sarah's old ones, stored in the trunk all these years, and carried them out to the barn one at a time. Chester stood in his stall, his long ears swiveling towards them as they entered. The old mule's brown eyes were bright with curiosity as Luis settled the girls on a hay bale near the feeding trough. "Here now," he said, showing them how to hold their palms flat with a few oats. "Let him come to you. That's the way of it." Chester's whiskers tickled their hands as he delicately lipped up the offered grain. Annie giggled, and Lila's smile grew wider. The mule seemed to sense their gentleness, staying close even after the treats were gone, allowing small hands to pat his fuzzy nose. "He's so soft," Lila marveled, stroking the white star between Chester's eyes. "And smart, too," Luis added, finding himself smiling more easily than he had in years. "Saved my life more than once in bad weather, finding the trail home when I couldn't see it myself." They spent the morning in the barn's warm shadows, Luis showing them how to brush Chester's coat and pick his hooves. The girls' laughter echoed off the rough-cut beams, chasing away the loneliness that had lived there so long. By afternoon, clouds were gathering again over the western peaks. Luis carried the twins back inside and settled them near the fire with some carved wooden animals he'd made during long winter evenings. As he worked at his table mending harness leather, their quiet play filled the cabin with peaceful sounds. "Once the trail clears," he said as he served their evening meal of beans and cornbread, "I'll take you down to Silvervale Valley. There's a mission there. Good people who'll know how to help you proper." The girls exchanged glances, a shadow passing over their faces. "Will you leave us there?" Annie asked, her voice small. Luis's hands stilled on his cup. He looked at their worried expressions and felt something twist in his chest. "We'll figure things out when we get there. Main thing is making sure you're safe." After supper, as the light faded outside, Annie's clear voice rose in that familiar hymn again. Luis closed his eyes, remembering how Sarah used to sing it while kneading bread or mending clothes. Then Lila joined in, her softer tones weaving perfectly with her sister's. And for a moment, he could have sworn he heard Sarah's voice too, braided through theirs like golden thread through dark silk. When the girls were tucked into bed, Luis lit his lamp and spread an old map across his table. His finger traced the railroad line until he found the red ridge the twins had mentioned. The land thereabouts had been prime trapping ground years ago, before the railway came through. His former partner, Clay Murdoch, had worked that territory with him for 2 seasons. Clay had been a decent enough trapper, but there was always something hungry in his eyes when talk turned to the railroad's expansion. Last Luis had heard, Clay had sold some questionable land deeds to the railway company and disappeared with the money. Now, studying the map's faded lines, an uneasy feeling settled in Luis's gut. The twins' story of bad men coming in the night, the location of their home so near Clay's old claims, it stirred memories he'd rather forget. He remembered Clay's easy smile, hiding sharp teeth. remembered the day they'd parted ways after Clay suggested some scheme that crossed lines Luis wouldn't cross. What trouble had his old partner stirred up, and how had it touched these innocent children? The lamp flickered as Luis stared at the map, its yellow light catching the worry in his eyes. From the bed came the soft sound of the twins breathing, peaceful in sleep. He looked over at them, these precious souls delivered to his door by what could only be Providence, and felt the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders. Whatever connection existed between their story and Clay's dealings, Luis knew one thing for certain. He would protect these children with everything he had. Sarah would have expected no less. He carefully folded the map and tucked it away, not wanting its troubling questions to disturb the cabin's hard-won peace. The night deepened around the cabin, still and cold under the stars. Luis added wood to the stove and settled into his chair, prepared to keep watch through the dark hours. In their sleep, Annie and Lila had moved closer together, their small hands clasped as if to anchor each other in dreams. He thought of Sarah's letter, tucked safely in her Bible, how she'd somehow known, even then, that love would find its way back to this cabin. Whatever came next, that love would light the path forward, as sure as the sun would rise over the mountains come morning. 2 days of clear weather had melted enough snow to make the trail passable. Luis watched the morning sun paint the peaks gold as he secured their supplies to Chester's pack saddle. The old mule stood patient and steady, ears flicking occasionally at the sound of the girls' soft chatter from the cabin porch. "Time to get moving," Luis called, adjusting the last strap. He'd fashioned a makeshift seat across Chester's broad back, using spare blankets and his old bedroll. Annie and Lila sat bundled in warm clothes he'd found in Sarah's trunk. Woolen stockings, lined boots that were a mite too big but better than nothing, and thick shawls wrapped tight around their shoulders. Their small faces peeked out from beneath knitted caps, eyes bright with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. Luis lifted them carefully onto Chester's back, making sure they were secure. "Now hold tight to the rope I tied there," he instructed, pointing to the lead line he'd fashioned into a handle. "And lean forward if we go downhill." "Yes, sir," they answered in unison, making him smile despite his worries. The morning air bit sharp and clean as they set out. Luis led Chester on foot, keeping to the widest part of the trail. Fresh snow crunched beneath his boots, and his breath clouded in the stillness. Above them, a pair of eagles circled against the crystal blue sky. "Look there," he said, pointing to tracks that crossed their path. "Wolf passed through here last night." The girls leaned forward, studying the prints with interest rather than fear. "Mama said wolves are like people," Annie remembered. "Some good, some bad, but most just trying to get by." Luis nodded, touched by the simple wisdom. "Your mama sounds like she was a right smart woman." They passed frozen creeks where ice had formed in delicate patterns, like ferns pressed in glass. The twins noticed everything: squirrel nests high in the pines, a woodpecker's rapid drumming, the way sunlight sparkled on untouched snow. Their wonder at these simple things made Luis see his familiar trail through new eyes. By midday, the sun had risen high enough to warm their backs. Luis spotted the old line shack ahead, a simple one-room structure where he'd often traded with miners in better days. "We'll rest there a spell," he said, leading Chester toward it. The cabin stood silent, its door hanging crooked on leather hinges. Luis helped the girls down, making sure they were steady on their heeling feet before leading them inside. The interior was musty but dry enough. A 3-legged table listed in one corner, and the crude stone fireplace still looked sound. "You two sit tight while I check around outside," he said, settling them on a relatively clean bench with some jerky and dried apples to share. The winter air had preserved everything in stark detail around the shack. Luis noticed fresh horse tracks, several days old, but clear in the frozen ground. As he circled the building, something caught his eye near the corner post. A wooden stake had been driven into the earth, its surface branded with official-looking letters. Luis brushed away frost to read the marking. His heart stumbled when he made out the words, "Property of Luis Pike." He stared at the stake, confusion knotting his stomach. He'd never claimed this land, had never owned more than his cabin and the few acres around it. Yet here was his name, burned into wood by railroad surveyors who marked territory for the coming tracks. Memory stirred like a disturbed hornet's nest. Clay Murdoch's eager talk about railroad money, the deed papers his old partner had wanted him to sign, claiming they were just insurance against territory disputes. Luis had refused, but what if Clay had found another way to use his name? Inside the shack, he heard the twins humming their mother's hymn. The sound twisted something in his chest. If Clay had stolen their family's land using his name somehow. Luis ran a hand over his face, feeling the weight of unwitting guilt settle on his shoulders. He couldn't tell the girls. Not yet. Not until he knew more. For now, they needed to focus on reaching Silvervale Valley safely. He gathered armloads of dry wood from behind the shack, and soon had a small fire crackling in the hearth. The girls huddled close to its warmth, sharing stories about their mother, how she'd taught them to read using that old Bible, how she'd worked so hard to keep their little house near the Red Ridge. Every word deepened Luis's unease, but he kept his expression calm. After an hour's rest, he helped them back onto Chester's broad back. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as they continued down the trail. By dusk, they'd reached a natural shelter, a sandstone bluff that curved like a cupped hand, blocking the wind. Luis had camped here often in his trapping days. He built a fire in the lee of the rock and prepared a simple supper of beans and salt pork. "Reminds me of Bible stories," Lila said sleepily, looking up at the stars appearing above the bluff. "Like when God led people through the wilderness." "And provided what they needed," Annie added, pulling her sister closer. Luis spread his heavy coat over them as they drifted toward sleep. The firelight caught the tracks of dried tears on their cheeks, not from sadness this time, but from yawning. Their trust in him felt both precious and terrifying. When their breathing had settled into the deep rhythm of slumber, Luis moved to the edge of the firelight. The moon had risen, turning the snow-covered valley below to silver. He knelt in that quiet light, removed his hat, and bowed his head. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "I don't know what part I played in these children's troubles. If my name was used to steal their home..." He paused, struggling to find words. "I ask your forgiveness for any harm I caused, knowing or unknowing, and I ask your guidance to make it right." The wind whispered through the pines below, carrying the distant cry of a coyote. Luis remained on his knees for a long while, watching over the sleeping twins and wrestling with his conscience. Whatever Clay Murdoch had done with his name, these children were now his responsibility. He would see them safe to the mission first, then work to uncover the truth about their lost home. The fire crackled low, sending sparks up to join the stars. Luis added another log and settled back against the bluff to keep watch through the night. Tomorrow would bring them closer to Silvervale Valley, and perhaps closer to answers he wasn't sure he wanted to find. The late morning sun cast long shadows across Silvervale as Luis guided Chester down the last stretch of mountain trail. Smoke rose in thin gray ribbons from a dozen stovepipes, carrying the sweet scent of burning pine. The small mining town sprawled across the valley floor, its weathered buildings hunched against the winter wind. Annie clutched the rope handle tighter. "So many houses," she whispered to Lila. Louise patted Chester's neck, steadying the old mule. "Folks here are mostly decent," he said, though his own stomach churned at the thought of entering town. He hadn't walked these streets in months, preferring his solitary life in the high country. As they passed the first row of buildings, faces appeared in frost-rimmed windows. Louise felt the weight of curious stares. 2 black children astride a mule, led by a mountain man. It wasn't a sight Silvervale saw every day. He kept his eyes forward, protecting the girls with his silence. The mission house stood near the center of town, its white-painted boards gleaming against the dirty snow. Mrs. Margaret Turnbull was already on the porch, no doubt alerted by the whispers running ahead of them. Her gray hair was twisted in its usual tight bun, and her sharp eyes missed nothing. "Louis Pike," she called out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Bringing visitors, I see." Her voice held warmth despite its brisk tone. "Mrs. Turnbull." Louis touched the brim of his hat. "These young ones need shelter and care. Their mama—" He glanced at the twins, lowering his voice. "Lost her on the mountain trail." Understanding softened Mrs. Turnbull's face. She stepped closer, studying the girls with gentle eyes. "Well now, you poor lambs must be half frozen. Come inside where it's warm. I've got bean soup simmering and fresh bread cooling." Louise helped Annie and Lila down from Chester's back. Their legs were stiff from riding, and they pressed close to him, shy before this strange woman. Mrs. Turnbull didn't rush them, just held the door open wide. "The Lord sends his children where they're needed," she said firmly, meeting the eyes of several townspeople who had gathered to stare. Her stance made it clear. These girls were under her protection now. Inside, the mission house was warm and smelled of fresh-baked bread. Mrs. Turnbull wrapped thick quilts around the twins' shoulders and settled them at the scarred wooden table. Soon they were spooning up hot soup, their earlier nervousness easing under her matter-of-fact kindness. "Louis," she said quietly, drawing him aside. "What brought them to your cabin?" He told her the bare facts, finding them in the storm, their mother's death, the hymn that had led him to them. Left unsaid was how their presence had cracked open his grief-frozen heart. "And you've no idea where they're from?" she asked. Louise hesitated. "They mentioned living near Red Ridge, by the railroad survey line. I need to speak with Marshal Colton about something connected to that." He glanced at the girls. "Would you keep them safe while I look into it?" "Of course." Mrs. Turnbull's expression was knowing. "You check what needs checking. These little ones will be here when you return." Louis stepped back into the bitter cold, his boots crunching through fresh snow. The general store was his first stop. Old Jim Parker kept records of most business dealings in town, official and otherwise. The store's bell jingled as he entered. Warm air carried the mixed scents of coffee, leather, and tobacco. Behind the counter, young Thomas, Jim's clerk, looked up from his ledger. "Mr. Pike," he nodded. "Been a while since we've seen you down from the mountain." "Thomas," Louis removed his hat. "Need to ask about Clay Murdoch. Heard anything lately?" The clerk's face fell slightly. "Past 6 months back. Pneumonia took him quick. Railroad company bought up all his holdings. Papers, deeds, claims, the lot." Louise's heart sank. "Any chance of seeing those records?" Thomas hesitated, then nodded. "Mr. Parker keeps copies of important papers. Give me a minute." He disappeared into the back room, returning with a leather folder. "Here's what we have on Murdoch's land sales. Some interesting documents in there." Luis moved closer to the coal stove, opening the folder with fingers that didn't want to cooperate. He leafed through several pages before stopping cold. There it was, a deed bearing his name, the signature, a near-perfect copy of his own hand. The land description matched what the twins had said about their home. Clay had forged his name years ago, using it to steal their property and sell it to the railroad. The betrayal burned like acid in Luis's throat. "Something wrong, Mr. Pike?" Thomas asked, noting his expression. Luis carefully closed the folder. "Need to see Marshal Colton. He in town today?" "Should be in his office." Thomas took the documents back, his face curious but respectful enough not to ask questions. The marshal's office sat between the saloon and the barber shop, its windows crystallized with frost. Luis knocked once before entering. Henry Colton looked up from his desk, gray mustache twitching in recognition. "Luis Pike. Don't often see you this time of year." "Henry." Luis settled his hat on one knee, choosing his words carefully. "Got a situation needs your attention. Involves Clay Murdoch and some forged documents." The marshal's eyes sharpened. He listened without interruption as Luis explained about finding the twins, the railroad stake bearing his name, and the deed he'd just discovered. "Clay always was too clever for his own good," Colton said when Luis finished. "Not surprised he'd try something like this, but proving it now, with him dead." He shook his head. "Railroad's got armies of lawyers in Denver. Won't be easy. Those girls lost their mama and their home because of papers bearing my name," Luis said quietly. "I aim to make it right." Colton studied him for a long moment. "Your word still means something in this valley, Luis. If you're willing to testify about the forgery, might be able to force the railroad to negotiate." He scratched his chin. "Meanwhile, Mrs. Turnbull taking care of the little ones?" "Yes, sir." "Good woman, that one. She'll see they're looked after." The marshal rose, reaching for his coat. "Let's head back to the store. Want another look at those documents myself?" Luis followed him into the street, his mind already working through what needed to be done. He'd failed to protect the twins' mother from Clay's schemes, however unknowingly. But he wouldn't fail these children again. Whatever it took, he'd see justice done. The afternoon sun was dropping behind the mountains as they walked, painting the snow-covered streets in shades of gold and purple. From the mission house came the faint sound of singing, the twins' hymn, joined now by Mrs. Turnbull's strong alto. The familiar melody wrapped around Luis's heart like a warm hand, strengthening his resolve. He'd thought God had abandoned him after Sarah's death. Now he wondered if perhaps the Lord had been leading him all along, through grief and solitude, to this moment of clarity. These children needed him, and maybe, just maybe, he needed them too. The afternoon light slanted through Silvervale's Mission Church windows, casting long shadows across worn wooden pews. Luis guided Annie and Lila up the center aisle, their small boots echoing in the quiet space. Pastor Abbott knelt near the altar, arranging firewood in the pot-bellied stove that heated the building. At their approach, he straightened, brushing dust from his hands. "Brother Pike," he said warmly. "And who might these young pilgrims be?" Luis explained their situation while the twins pressed close to his legs, their eyes wide as they took in the church's modest beauty, painted glass windows, simple cross, and walls lined with scripture verses in careful lettering. The pastor's weathered face grew serious as he listened. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said finally, crouching to the girl's eye level. "We have room here at the mission. Several other children stay with us already." "Just temporary," Luis added quickly. until we sort out their land claim." Abbott's expression clouded. "Ah, that may prove difficult." He gestured for Louise to follow him to a side alcove, while the twins examined a carved nativity scene nearby. The railroad's agent, Edwin Sloan, arrived last week. He's been serving notices to everyone living along the ridgeline. Claims they're all squatters on company land. Louise's jaw tightened. Their mother had a homestead there. Legal claim. "I believe you." Abbott sighed. "But Sloan has the courts and the money behind him. He's already forced 3 families to leave." He glanced at the twins. "These little ones will need somewhere safe while this gets sorted out." "They'll have it," Louise said firmly. "I aim to see Marshal Colton about this now." Abbott nodded. "Go on then. Martha will show the girls where they can rest." He called to his wife, who appeared from the back room with a gentle smile. The twins looked uncertainly at Louise. "I'll be back soon," he promised them. "You're safe here with Pastor Abbott and Miss Martha." Annie gripped his sleeve. "You won't let the bad men come again?" Louise knelt, meeting their eyes. "No one's going to hurt you. That's a promise before God and man." He watched as Martha led them away, then strode out into the cold afternoon. His boots crunched through snow as he made his way to the marshal's office, anger building with each step. The door was open when he arrived, voices drifting out. "The law is quite clear on this matter," someone was saying in cultured tones. "These illegal settlements impede progress?" Louise stepped inside to find Marshal Colton behind his desk, facing a well-dressed man in an expensive coat. The stranger turned, revealing a thin face with cold eyes. "Ah," the man said, "you must be Mr. Pike. I'm Edwin Sloan, representing the Denver and Western Railroad Company." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I was just discussing the situation on Red Ridge with the marshal." "Those children have rights to that land," Louise said without preamble. "Their mother homesteaded there, legal and proper." Sloane's expression hardened slightly. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. Our records show no valid claims in that area. Those colored girls are squatting on railroad property, just like their mother was." Louise took a step forward, hands clenching. "Their mother died in the snow because someone ran them off their rightful home." "A regrettable incident," Sloan said smoothly. "But the law requires all trespassers to vacate railroad land. Surely you understand progress requires sacrifice." "Progress?" Louise spat the word. "Is that what you call stealing from orphaned children?" Sloane's veneer of politeness cracked. "I'd be careful with such accusations, Mr. Pike, especially given your own interesting connection to certain property deeds." Louise lunged forward, rage burning through his veins. Marshal Colton moved fast, stepping between them. "That's enough," he said firmly. "Both of you." He fixed Sloan with a hard look. "Those claims need proper investigation before anyone's removed." "By all means, investigate," Sloan replied, adjusting his coat. "But the company's rights are clear. Those girls must vacate the property." He picked up his hat. "Good day, gentlemen." Louise watched him leave, trembling with barely contained fury. The marshal put a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Easy, friend," Colton said quietly. "That man's the type who fights with paper and ink, not fists. We need to be smarter than him." "He's trying to steal their home," Louise growled, "using my forged name to do it." "Then we'll prove the forgery," Colton said. "But it'll take time. Meanwhile, those girls need protection more than revenge." Louise took a deep breath, forcing his anger down. "You're right. I should get back to them." Night was falling as he returned to the mission church. Lamplight glowed in the windows, and the smell of cooking drifted from the kitchen. He found the twins helping Martha Abbott set the table for evening meal, their small faces brightening when they saw him. "Mr. Luis," Lila called. "We helped make biscuits." "Did you now?" He managed a smile, though his heart ached at their innocence. Reckon they'll taste extra good then. After supper, as other children cleared the tables, Luis sat with the twins near the stove. Annie leaned against his arm, half asleep, while Lila hummed their mother's hymn softly. "You girls listen," he said gently. "Some folks might try to say you can't go back to your home, but I want you to know something." He waited until they both looked at him. "I won't let anyone take what's rightfully yours. Not ever." "Promise?" Annie whispered. "I promise." He drew them closer, feeling their small bodies relax against him. "The Lord brought you to my cabin that night. Reckon he had his reasons." Pastor Abbott, passing by with an armload of blankets, caught Luis's eye and nodded approval. The old preacher had seen enough of life to know when God's hand was at work. Outside, snow began falling again, soft and steady in the darkness. But inside the mission church, wrapped in warmth and lamplight, 2 orphaned girls finally slept peacefully, guarded by a mountain man who'd found his purpose again. Luis watched over them, his mind working through plans and possibilities. He'd need help to fight Sloan and the railroad, lawyers maybe, or witnesses who knew Clay's crooked dealings. But looking down at the sleeping twins, he knew with bone-deep certainty that this was a battle worth fighting. Sometimes, he reflected, the Lord's greatest mercies came disguised as burdens. These children had awakened something in him he'd thought died with Sarah. The courage to stand against injustice, to protect the innocent, to believe in something bigger than his own grief. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But for now, in this quiet moment, Luis simply gave thanks for the strange path that had led him here, and for the chance to make things right. Martha Abbott bustled over with more blankets, tucking them around the sleeping girls. "They trust you," she whispered. "The Lord knows what he's about." Luis nodded, touched by the simple truth in her words. Whatever came next, he would not break faith with these children. Some promises he knew were sacred. Morning brought more than just sunlight to Silvervale. Whispers spread through the town like wildfire, carried from the general store to the saloon, from the telegraph office to the boarding houses. Luis Pike, the mountain hermit who'd barely spoken 10 words together in the past 5 years, was now keeping 2 colored children at the mission and challenging the railroad's claims. "Gone plumb crazy, if you ask me," muttered old Joe Barnes as he warmed his hands by the general store's pot-bellied stove. War must have finally caught up with his mind. Sarah Whitfield, arranging penny candy behind the counter, clicked her tongue. "Heard tell those girls was found half frozen in the snow. What was he supposed to do, leave them there?" "Could have dropped them at the orphan train station in Denver," Joe replied. "Ain't natural, him taking on their cause like this." The bell above the door chimed as Luis himself entered, his boots leaving wet prints on the wooden floor. The whispers died immediately. He nodded curtly to Sarah and gathered the supplies he needed: coffee, flour, a new axe handle. The silence felt heavy as a winter blanket. "Mighty cold morning," Sarah offered kindly as she wrapped his purchases. "That it is, ma'am." Luis paid and turned to leave, catching the way old Joe and the others avoided his eyes. It didn't matter. He had work to do. Behind the mission church, Luis had built a simple lean-to shelter. It wasn't much, just a slanted roof of pine boards with 3 walls and a canvas flap for the 4th, but it kept him close to the twins. The girls slept inside the mission with the other orphans under Martha Abbott's care, while Luis spent his days making himself useful around the property. That morning, he found loose shingles on the mission's roof. "Reckon I can fix that," he told Pastor Abbott, who watched him haul tools up the ladder. "Much obliged," Abbott said, then hesitated. "Luis, Some folks been talking." "Let them talk." Louis tested a loose board with his boot. "I aim to address it Sunday." Abbott's voice carried firm conviction. "The good book's mighty clear about caring for orphans and widows. Skin color don't enter into it." Louis paused in his work, looking down at the older man. "Appreciate that, Pastor." The morning sun climbed higher as Louis worked, replacing rotted boards and hammering new shingles into place. Below, he could hear the twins' voices mixed with other children as they played in the mission yard. Annie's laugh rang clear as a bell, while Lila's softer giggle followed. The sound warmed him more than the winter sunshine. Sunday came, and the little church filled with townsfolk. Louis sat in the back row, the twins beside him in their best dresses, handed down from Martha Abbott's grandchildren. Annie swung her feet, while Lila traced the Bible verses in their mother's old book with one small finger. Pastor Abbott took his place behind the pulpit, his voice strong despite his years. "Today we're speaking about mercy," he began, "about how the Lord weighs a man's heart." The congregation shifted as Abbott's gaze swept over them. "Some have questioned recent events in our town, asked why certain children are being sheltered here, why certain men stand up for them." He paused. "Well, I'll tell you plain. A man's heart is weighed by mercy, not skin. The Good Shepherd seeks every lost lamb, regardless of its color." Louis felt Annie lean against his arm, her small hand slipping into his. Behind them, someone coughed uncomfortably. "Jesus said, 'Let the little children come to me,'" Abbott continued. "He didn't specify which children, and when we stand before him, he won't ask about our fine clothes or our business dealings. He'll ask if we showed mercy, if we protected the innocent, if we stood for what's right." After the service, several families nodded to Louis as they passed. Mrs. Turner, the baker's wife, pressed a paper-wrapped loaf into his hands. "Fresh this morning," she said with a smile. "Children need good bread to grow." The days fell into a rhythm. Louis rose early, chopped wood for the mission's stoves, and helped with whatever needed fixing. The twins spent mornings with Martha Abbott, learning their letters and numbers alongside the other children. In the afternoons, they often followed Louis around as he worked, asking endless questions about everything they saw. "Why does Chester have such long ears?" Lila would ask about the old mule. "Better to hear trouble coming," Louis would answer, finding himself smiling more often than not. One evening, after supper in the mission's warm kitchen, the girls helped Martha clear the dishes while Louis carved by the fire. His knife moved carefully over a piece of pine wood, shaping it bit by bit. Annie wandered over, watching the shavings curl and fall. "What are you making, Mr. Louis?" "Something special," he answered, turning the wood in his hands. The rough shape of a small lamb was emerging. "Is it a sheep?" Lila joined them, her eyes bright with interest. "That's right." Louis smoothed a rough edge. "One for each of you when they're done." The girls settled beside him, Annie on his right and Lila on his left, watching the carving take shape. The fire crackled softly, and outside snow began to fall again. "Mr. Louis?" Annie's voice was thoughtful. "Is your wife in heaven?" Louis's hand stilled on the carving. The question caught him off guard, but Annie's face showed only innocent curiosity. He looked into the fire for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes," he said softly. "I reckon she is." "Our mama's in heaven too," Lila said quietly. Louis felt something shift in his heart, like ice breaking up in spring. "I reckon she is," he repeated. "And you know what else I reckon?" Both girls looked up at him expectantly. "I reckon your mama and my Sarah got together up there and planned this whole thing out." He managed to smile. "I reckon Sarah sent you to me." Annie considered this seriously. "Because we needed help?" Because we all needed help, Luis corrected gently. Me included. The fire's warmth and the day's activities soon had their effect. The twins gradually dozed off, their heads resting against Luis's shoulders. He sat very still, listening to their soft breathing, feeling the weight of their trust. Martha Abbott came in with fresh kindling and paused at the sight. Her eyes met Luis's over the sleeping children, and she smiled knowingly. "They're good girls," she whispered. Luis nodded, careful not to disturb them. "That they are." He looked down at the half-carved lamb in his hands, thinking of another shepherd who had once sought lost sheep. The wood was rough yet, but he could see the finished form within, just as he could see the family they were becoming, despite all odds. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Silvervale in white. But inside the mission, by the fire's glow, a mountain man who had lost everything now found himself rich in what mattered most, the love of two small girls who needed him as much as he needed them. The wooden lamb would take shape slowly, carefully, just as their bond was forming, one day at a time, one act of love at a time, until what had once been broken became whole again. 3 days after the Sunday sermon, Luis sat at Pastor Abbott's weathered desk, his rough hands careful with the pen and paper. Morning light streamed through the mission's windows as he wrote each word with deliberate care, making his case to the Denver court about the forged deed. His signature had always been simple, just L. Pike, with a slight curl on the P, but he made sure it was extra clear today. Pastor Abbott leaned over, reading the finished petition. "Well stated, Luis. Plain truth carries its own power." "Much obliged for the help with the fancy legal words," Luis said, carefully folding the document. "Never was much good at official papers. That's likely why Clay Murdoch thought he could get away with forging your name." Abbott sealed the letter in an envelope. "The morning stage should get this to Denver by week's end." They walked together to the stagecoach office, where the driver recognized them with a tip of his hat. "Pastor, Mr. Pike." He tucked the envelope into his mail pouch. "This'll reach Denver safe and sound." Luis watched the stage roll away, dust rising behind the wheels. A weight lifted from his chest. He was finally doing something to make things right. Back at the mission, he found the twins in Martha Abbott's small garden, carefully pulling weeds from between the early spring plantings. Annie had tied her hair back with a faded ribbon, while Lila wore one of Martha's old aprons, rolled up at the sleeves. "Look, Mr. Luis," Annie held up a fat earthworm. "He's helping the garden grow." "That he is," Luis agreed, kneeling beside them. "Just like you're helping by clearing these weeds." The garden work filled their morning. Luis showed the girls how to tell helpful plants from unwanted ones, how to water gently around tender stems. Their small hands grew dirty, but their faces shone with pride at each task mastered. After lunch, Luis tackled the broken fence along the mission's western edge. Several posts had rotted through, leaving gaps where local dogs sometimes got into Martha's chicken coop. He dug new post holes while the twins handed him tools and asked questions about everything they saw. "Why do chickens need a fence?" Lila wondered, watching the hens scratch in their yard. "Same reason people need walls," Luis explained, tamping dirt around a fresh post. "Keeps them safe while they sleep." Other children from the mission school gradually drifted over to watch him work. Tommy Andrews, about 7 years old, had been shy around the twins at first. Now he helped gather stones to steady the fence posts, working alongside Annie as if they'd always been friends. "My pa used to build fences," Tommy told her, "before the fever took him." Annie nodded solemnly. "Our mama's gone too." The simple exchange made Luis's throat tight. Children shared grief so honestly, finding common ground where adults often built walls. Through the week, Luis watched the twins slowly integrate into mission life. Martha Abbott reported they were quick studies with their letters and numbers. During breaks, they played jump rope with Sarah Turner and helped Tommy feed the chickens. Their laughter mixed with the other children's voices, bright and natural as bird song. The waiting wasn't easy, but Luis kept busy. He split firewood, patched the mission's roof, and helped Martha preserve early spring vegetables. Every morning, he checked with the telegraph office for news from Denver. Finally, one evening just before supper, young Billy from the telegraph office came running up to the mission, waving a yellow paper. "Mr. Pike, message from Denver." Luis took the telegram with slightly shaking hands, reading the brief text. "Petition received. Stop court will review deed case in 2 weeks. Stop presence may be required." Stop. "Good news?" Pastor Abbott asked, coming to stand beside him. "They're going to look at it," Luis said, relief evident in his voice. "In 2 weeks." "The Lord works in his own time," Abbott nodded. "But he does work." Hope rose in Luis's chest like spring water. 2 weeks wasn't so long to wait, not when it meant possibly securing the twins' future. He tucked the telegram into his shirt pocket, eager to tell the girls their patience might soon be rewarded. The sun was setting as he walked from the telegraph office toward the mission, painting Silvervale's buildings in deep gold and purple shadows. The evening air carried the scent of wood smoke from cooking fires, along with something sharper, tobacco smoke from the corner near Whitaker's feed store. Luis's steps slowed. 3 men lounged against the storefront, watching him. He recognized them as Sloan's hired muscle, the kind of men who did the railroad's dirty work while keeping its hands clean. The tallest one, Jenkins, spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Evening, Pike," he drawled. "Sending letters to Denver, we hear." Luis kept walking, his spine straight. "Just business." "Funny business, maybe," another man muttered. "Stirring up trouble where there ain't none." The third man simply stared, smoke curling from his cigarette. His hand rested near his gun belt in a way that wasn't quite a threat, but carried clear meaning. Luis passed them without further comment, but his neck prickled until he turned the corner. The evening's sweet promise had soured, tainted by the taste of threat in the air. These men worked for Sloan, and Sloan wasn't known for accepting defeat gracefully. When he reached the mission, Luis found the twins setting the table for supper. Annie was carefully placing forks, while Lila followed with spoons, their movements already settled into familiar routine. They looked up at his entrance, faces bright with welcome. "We're having stew," Annie announced, "and Miss Martha made biscuits." Luis managed a smile, pushing his worry aside. "Sounds fine," he said, helping Lila straighten a crooked spoon. "Just fine." But later, after the girls were asleep, he walked the mission's perimeter twice before retiring to his lean-to. The night was clear, stars sharp as broken glass above the valley. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, a lonely sound that seemed to carry warning in its wavering notes. Luis checked his rifle before lying down, making sure it was loaded and close at hand. 2 weeks suddenly felt like a very long time to wait, with Sloan's men watching from the shadows. But he would wait, and watch, and pray that the law would prove stronger than railroad money. The lamp's flame threw his shadow against the canvas wall as he knelt for his evening prayers. "Lord," he whispered, "keep us all safe until justice can be done." Outside, the spring wind carried the lingering scent of smoke through Silvervale's darkened streets. Luis lay awake for a long time, listening to the night sounds and remembering the cold look in those men's eyes. Whatever came, he would be ready. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright over Silvervale. The church bell rang across the valley, its bronze voice calling the faithful to worship. Luis helped the twins brush their hair and straighten their donated dresses before walking them to the whitewashed building where townsfolk gathered in their Sunday best. Pastor Abbott met them at the door, his weathered face kind. "Brother Pike," he said softly, "would you share your testimony with us today? The congregation needs to hear your story firsthand." Luis's throat tightened. He hadn't spoken before a crowd since the war. "I ain't much for public speaking, Pastor." "Sometimes the plainest words carry the most truth," Abbott replied. "Just speak from your heart." They found seats near the front, where morning light streamed through tall windows. The twins sat perfectly still, their small hands folded in their laps. Luis noticed Marshal Colton in his usual back pew, hat respectfully removed. Mrs. Eleanor Hanley, the widow who cooked for ranch hands, nodded to them from across the aisle. After the opening hymn and prayer, Pastor Abbott stepped to the pulpit. "Brothers and sisters, we have among us today a man whose story needs telling. Luis Pike has shown us what it means to be a true neighbor. Brother Pike, will you share with us how the Lord worked through you this winter?" Luis rose slowly, his legs unsteady. The wooden floorboards creaked under his boots as he approached the front. Facing the congregation, he saw curiosity in some faces, wariness in others. He took a deep breath. "3 weeks ago," he began, his voice rough, "I was hauling firewood home through the worst storm we've had. Was thinking only of myself, of getting warm." He paused, gathering strength. "Then I heard singing, a hymn my Sarah used to love, carrying through the wind like an angel's voice." The church grew still as Luis described finding the twins beneath the fallen pine, their mother gone, their feet nearly frozen. His voice cracked when he spoke of carrying them home, of their trust in his help. "They had nothing but faith in their mama's Bible," he continued. "And in that Bible," his hands trembled as he withdrew the folded letter, "I found this, written by my Sarah before she passed." Luis read the letter aloud, Sarah's words filling the hushed church. How she had nursed a dying woman's infant during the war. How she had prayed that someday God would bring children back into their lives. By the time he finished, several women were dabbing at their eyes with handkerchiefs. "I lost my faith when Sarah died," Luis admitted. "Blamed God, turned my back on his mercy. But through these little ones, he showed me. His plan was bigger than my grief." He looked at the twins, who smiled encouragingly. Their mama told them the man in the mountains would help. Somehow she knew God had prepared a place for them, even if I didn't know it myself. Mrs. Hanley suddenly stood up, her voice strong and clear. "I lost 2 sons in that same war," she declared, "but I see God's hand in this. I'll testify to any court that these children belong here, with a father who loves them true." "As will I," said old Thomas Wheeler, rising from his seat. "My own grandpa came west with nothing but faith. These girls deserve no less chance than he had." One by one, other townsfolk stood. The blacksmith, the general store owner, Martha Abbott. Even quiet folk who rarely spoke in public found their voices, pledging support for Luis and the twins. Marshal Colton remained seated, but he touched his hat brim in silent affirmation when Luis met his eyes. The law would hear these testimonies. "Thank you, Brother Pike," Pastor Abbott said, laying a gentle hand on Luis's shoulder. "Now, I believe Annie and Lila have a song to share." The twins walked forward, holding hands, their clear voices lifted in perfect harmony, singing the hymn that had guided Luis through the storm. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. The congregation joined softly on the second verse, the music swelling until it seemed to make the windows vibrate. Louise saw tears streaming down weather-beaten faces. Mrs. Hanley wrapped her arm around his shoulders as they sang, her embrace maternal and fierce. When the service ended, people lingered to shake Louise's hand and pat the twins' heads. Women promised to send food and clothes. Men offered to help repair his cabin. The community's suspicion had transformed into something warmer, like spring sun melting winter ice. "You did well," Marshal Colton said quietly, catching Louise by the door. "Sloan may have money and lawyers, but he can't buy what I saw in this church today. Truth has its own power." That evening, Louise sat with the twins on the mission's front step, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Annie leaned against his arm, while Lila braided long stems of spring grass. "Did we sing good?" Annie asked. "You sang like angels," Louise assured her. "Just like your mama taught you." "And like your Sarah," Lila added softly. Louise nodded, his chest full of an unfamiliar feeling. It took him a moment to recognize it as peace, not the empty quiet he'd sought in his mountain solitude, but something deeper. Something that felt like coming home. The mission bell tolled the evening hour, its notes floating across the valley. Louise closed his eyes and offered a silent prayer of gratitude. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt her presence not as a wound, but as a blessing. Through her final act of mercy, written in that letter, she had helped him find his way back to faith, family, and community. The twins' small hands found his, warm and trusting. Together they watched the stars emerge above Silvervale, each light a promise in the gathering dark. The mountain night lay peaceful over Silvervale, stars twinkling through patches of cloud. Louise dozed in his lean-to behind the mission, wrapped in his buffalo robe. The twins slept safely inside, their small beds near Sister Martha's room. His mind drifted to plans for rebuilding, not just his solitary life, but a real home where three hearts could heal together. A shout pierced the darkness, yanking him from half-sleep. Louise sat bolt upright, every sense alert. The air carried a scent that made his blood run cold, wood smoke, but not from evening cook fires. This was the sharp, hungry smell of destruction. More shouts echoed from the ridge. Through the trees, an orange glow pulsed against low clouds. Louise's heart stopped. His cabin. The evidence. The letter. He grabbed his coat and ran to Marshal Colton's house, pounding on the door. The lawman appeared quickly, as if he hadn't been sleeping either. "Fire up on Pine Ridge," Louise gasped. "My cabin." Colton's face hardened. "Sloan's work. I'll bet my badge on it." He grabbed his gun belt. "I'll wake the Murphy brothers. They're good miners, not afraid of Sloan's bunch." Within minutes, they were riding hard up the snow-crusted trail, the Murphy twins following on their draft horses. The burning cabin lit the night like a torch. As they approached, Louise saw dark figures mounting up, riding fast toward the pass. "Hold it!" Colton shouted, but the riders vanished into the darkness. Louise leaped from his horse, running toward the inferno that had been his home. Heat slapped his face as flames devoured the log walls. The roof groaned, timbers crackling like rifle shots. "The letter!" Louise lunged forward, but Colton caught his arm. "Too late, Louise, it'll collapse any second." As if summoned by the marshal's words, the burning roof caved in with a thunderous crash. Sparks exploded skyward like a swarm of fireflies. Louise fell to his knees in the snow, watching helplessly as the flames consumed everything: Sarah's letter, the deed, all proof of the truth. Sean Murphy, the older of the mining brothers, gripped Louise's shoulder. "We saw them, Louise. We'll testify who done this." "Aye," Patrick Murphy added. "Sloan's men, clear as day. Even recognized Bill Hawkins by that yellow duster he wears." But Luis barely heard them. Something worse than the fire's destruction clawed at his gut. A shadow of deeper dread. He scrambled to his feet. "The twins," he whispered, then louder. "The twins! We have to get back!" They rode down the mountain at breakneck speed, hooves thundering through the darkness. Luis's heart hammered against his ribs. "Please, Lord," he prayed. "Please let them be safe." The mission stood silent in the pre-dawn gloom. No lights burned in the windows. Luis burst through the front door, taking the stairs 3 at a time. "Annie! Lila!" His voice echoed through empty halls. Sister Martha appeared in her nightdress, face pale. "Luis? What's happened? I heard nothing. They were sleeping soundly when I checked at midnight." Luis crashed into the girls' room. The small beds were empty, covers thrown back as if the twins had been snatched from sleep. A cold breeze whispered through an open window. He staggered back downstairs, the world spinning around him. Marshal Colton was examining the front door, his expression grim. He held out a piece of paper. "Found this pinned here," he said quietly. Luis's trembling fingers took the note. 3 words stabbed his heart. "Trespassers removed." His legs gave out. He slumped against the doorframe, the paper crumpling in his fist. The emptiness that had haunted him after Sarah's death roared back like a black tide, threatening to drown him. "I'll round up a posse," Colton said, his voice hard with anger. "They can't have gone far with 2 children in the dark." But Luis barely heard him. His world had collapsed more completely than his burning cabin. First Sarah, now the twins, everyone he dared to love taken away. The darkness pressed in, cold and absolute. Sister Martha knelt beside him, her hand gentle on his arm. "Luis, look at me. The Lord hasn't abandoned you. We'll find them." "How?" The word came out as a broken whisper. "I promised to protect them. I promised—" Dawn was breaking, pale and cheerless. The first snowflakes began to drift down, delicate as ash. Luis stared up at the iron-gray sky, his face wet with tears or melting snow. He couldn't tell which. "Lord!" he cried out, his voice raw with anguish. "Let me see light again." The snow fell faster, erasing tracks, burying hope. Inside the mission, he heard Sister Martha gathering supplies, heard Colton giving orders to the Murphy brothers. But Luis remained on his knees, crushed by failure, drowning in darkness. The hymn the twins had sung just days ago in church echoed mockingly in his memory. "Was blind, but now I see." He had thought he was finally seeing clearly. God's purpose, a path to redemption, a chance to be a father again. Now blindness crashed back, darker than before. Marshal Colton's bootsteps crunched in the new snow. "Luis, we're ready to ride. The men are gathering at the livery stable." He paused. "We'll find them, Luis, and Sloan will answer for this." Luis pressed his palms against the rough wood of the mission door, forcing himself to stand. The pain threatened to buckle his knees again, but he fought it back. Somewhere in the growing storm, 2 little girls needed him. They had trusted him once in the snow and darkness. He couldn't fail them again. Snow swirled around him as he walked stiffly toward the stables. Each step felt like moving through deep water, against a current of despair. But he kept moving, 1 foot in front of the other, while his heart cried out in silent prayer. The mission bell tolled 6 times, its bronze voice almost lost in the wind. Another day beginning in Silvervale Valley, but for Luis Pike, it was the darkest dawn he had ever known. The pale winter dawn crept over Silvervale, painting the fresh snow in shades of pearl and rose. Luis stood in the mission stable, his fingers trembling as he tightened Chester's saddle straps. The old mule sensed his urgency, standing quietly instead of his usual fidgeting. "Steady now, old friend," Luis whispered, his voice rough from a sleepless night. "We've got precious cargo to find." Marshal Colton had organized search parties heading east and west, but Luis knew better. He'd spotted wagon tracks heading north, partially hidden by fresh snow, toward the high timber where the winter storms bred. The same direction where his wife, Sarah, had once tended the sick during the war. The memory of her letter burned in his mind, every word etched deeper than the ashes of his cabin. He'd read it so many times in the past week, he could recite it by heart. As he led Chester out into the breaking dawn, the words echoed in his thoughts like a prayer. "To the children who find this book," he murmured, mounting carefully, "God brought you to these pages for a reason." The North Trail climbed steadily through stands of blue spruce and aspen. The morning sun cast long shadows across the new snow, but offered little warmth. Luis pulled his collar higher against the biting wind, guiding Chester around patches of ice. "Your mama knew that someday someone would need the comfort I once gave," he continued reciting, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "During the war, I nursed a tiny black baby whose mother had died. I prayed then that God would someday bring that child, or others like her, back into our lives." Hour after hour, they climbed higher. The wagon tracks grew fainter under fresh snow, but Luis's experienced eyes picked out signs: broken branches, displaced rocks, places where the horses had struggled on the steep grade. Chester's hooves crunched steadily through the crusty snow, his ears pricked forward. "I leave this Bible as a beacon of hope." Luis spoke the words aloud, finding strength in them. "For the Lord works in ways we cannot see, bringing light from darkness and family to the lonely." Near midday, they passed the timberline where the trees grew sparse and twisted. The wind howled across exposed rock faces, driving needles of ice. Luis's hands had gone numb despite his thick gloves. Chester plodded on, steam rising from his flanks. "Your path led you here for his purpose." Luis's voice cracked as he recited the final lines. "May you find the love and shelter you seek. With faith eternal, Sarah Pike." The sun hung low on the western horizon when Luis spotted something dark against the white snow. His heart clenched as he dismounted stiffly, his boots crunching through the crust. There, half buried in fresh powder, lay a small cloth doll with yellow yarn hair. Annie's most precious possession. Luis lifted it carefully, brushing away the snow. The simple toy had barely survived their journey from the ridge, but Annie had refused to part with it. "Mama made it," she'd told him proudly that first night in his cabin. He tucked the doll inside his coat, close to his heart. "I'm coming, little ones," he whispered. "Hold fast to hope." The wind shifted then, carrying something that made him freeze. Music, faint but unmistakable. The same hymn he'd heard that first night in the storm, the one Sarah used to sing. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." The voices were small, but clear, rising above the wind's moan. Luis's eyes filled with tears that froze on his cheeks. His girls were singing their mother's hymn, singing Sarah's hymn, singing their way through darkness just as they had before. He left Chester ground-tied in a sheltered hollow and began climbing on foot, following the sound. The rocky ridge rose steep and treacherous, ice gleaming on its face. But the singing drew him upward like a beacon. "Was blind, but now I see." The words grew stronger as he climbed, using his rifle as a staff against the slick rock. His fingers ached as they gripped frozen handholds. The wind tried to tear him from the ridge, but he pressed on, one careful step at a time. Near the top, he spotted a faint orange glow reflecting off the rocks. A cave or hollow, he realized, tucked into the ridge's face. The singing echoed from inside, along with the murmur of men's voices. Luis crouched in the gathering dusk, counting his breaths to steady his racing heart. The hollow would be defensible, easy for Sloane's men to guard, but they wouldn't expect anyone to attempt the climb in a winter storm. The wind gusted harder, drowning out the voices. But Luis didn't need to hear them anymore. He knew the twins were there, singing their mother's hymn, Sarah's hymn, keeping faith alive in the darkness just as he had failed to do after her death. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, the words rose in his heart as he studied the approach to the hollow. I have already come. The light from inside cast enough glow to reveal a narrow ledge leading to the entrance. Luis touched the small doll inside his coat, drawing strength from its presence. Sarah's letter had promised that God would bring children to him who needed shelter. He hadn't understood then that he needed them just as much, needed their innocent faith to lead him back to light. He began inching along the ledge, pressing his back against the cold rock. The wind buffeted him, trying to pry him loose, but he kept moving. The twins' voices grew clearer with each careful step, mixing with his wife's voice in memory, forming a lifeline of grace that guided him through the storm. The orange glow spilled out onto the snow, and Luis could make out shadows moving inside the hollow. His fingers found the grip of his rifle, but he hesitated. Violence had never brought him peace before. Perhaps there was another way, a way of grace, as Sarah would have wanted. He paused at the edge of the light, listening to the twins sing. Their faith flowed out into the gathering night, undimmed by fear or cold or loneliness. Just as he had once been blind but now could see, they were lighting the way through darkness with their simple trust that help would come. The last rays of sun faded from the ridge as Luis prepared himself for whatever lay ahead. But the despair that had crushed him at dawn was gone, replaced by a calm certainty. Whether through strength or surrender, justice or mercy, he would bring his girls home. Sarah's words echoed one final time in his heart. The Lord works in ways we cannot see, bringing light from darkness and family to the lonely. The wind died suddenly, leaving only the sound of singing from the hollow. Luis took a deep breath, tightened his grip on the cold rock, and edged closer to the light. The hollow's entrance gaped like a dark mouth in the mountainside. Luis inched forward on the narrow ledge, his back pressed against frozen rock. Shadows danced inside, cast by a dying fire. He expected to hear men's voices, but only the twins' soft singing reached his ears. "Be careful," Annie's voice drifted out. "The fire's getting small." Luis's heart leaped at the sound. He edged closer, peering into the hollow. No guards stood watch. No men lounged around the embers. Only his two girls huddled together near a pitiful pile of smoking branches, their small forms shivering in the growing cold. "Annie? Lila?" he called softly. Two heads snapped up, eyes wide in the dimness. "Mr. Pike!" Annie's voice cracked with joy. She started to rise, but Luis held up a warning hand. "Stay still, children. Let me check it's safe first." He slipped inside, rifle ready, scanning the shadows. But the hollow was empty, save for the twins and some abandoned supplies, a few dirty blankets, an overturned pot, scattered kindling. "They left when the storm came," Lila explained, her quiet voice trembling. "Said we weren't worth freezing for." Luis's jaw tightened at their cruelty, but he pushed the anger aside. His girls needed him. He propped his rifle against the wall and knelt beside them, gathering them close. They burrowed into his chest like baby birds seeking warmth. "You're both so cold," he murmured, feeling their icy hands. "Let's get this fire built up proper." He found dry twigs and branches among the scattered supplies, carefully feeding them into the dying embers. Soon flames crackled and popped, pushing back the darkness. Luis shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around both girls. "But you'll be cold," Annie protested. "The fire'll keep me warm enough." He smiled, reaching into his coat pocket. "Look what I found on the trail." Annie's eyes filled with tears as he pulled out her doll. "Mama's dolly," she whispered, hugging it close. "I thought I lost her forever." "The Lord provides," Luis said softly, remembering Sarah's words. He settled beside them, adding more wood to the growing flames. "He led me right to that doll, and she led me to you." Annie looked up at him, firelight dancing in her dark eyes. "Mama said angels got beards sometimes," she said solemnly. "And they come when you're scared and sing with you." Luis laughed through sudden tears, stroking her hair. "Is that why you were singing? To call an angel?" Lila nodded against his shoulder. "Annie said we should sing Mama's hymn, like before. She said you'd hear us and come." "Such faith," Luis whispered, his heart full. He remembered his own desperate prayers in the storm that first night, when their singing had guided him to them. "Your mama was right about angels, and about singing through the dark." The wind howled outside, driving snow past the hollow's mouth. Luis could smell more storm coming. They'd have to wait it out here, where at least they had shelter and fire. "Shall we sing together?" he suggested. "To keep warm until morning?" Annie started the hymn, her clear voice rising above the wind. Lila joined in harmony, just as they had that first night in his cabin. This time, Luis added his own deep voice, remembering how Sarah used to sing these same words while working in their garden or rocking by the fire. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." The hollow filled with music, their breath mingling with the smoke that curled toward the rocky ceiling. Hour after hour through the long night, they sang every hymn they knew. When the twins grew tired, Luis told them stories from the Bible: David and Goliath, Daniel in the lion's den, Queen Esther saving her people. "Those were scared folks too," he explained, tucking the coat tighter around them. "But they trusted God to see them through, just like you did." "Just like you did too," Annie murmured sleepily. "Coming to find us in the snow? Twice now?" Luis's throat tightened. "That's right. God sent me to you both times." He looked into the flames, seeing Sarah's face in his mind. "Or maybe you were sent to me, to help me find my way back to faith." The girls drifted off against his chest as the storm raged outside. Luis kept the fire fed, watching their peaceful faces in its glow. His own heart felt warmer than it had in years, thawed by their simple trust and courage. When dawn finally broke, the storm had passed. Pale sunlight spilled into the hollow, turning the fresh snow to diamond dust. Luis gently woke the twins and helped them put on his coat. "Time to go home," he said, gathering their few belongings. "Think you can hold tight to my back while I climb down?" Annie nodded bravely. "Like riding Chester, only higher up." "That's right." Luis smiled, kneeling so they could climb onto his broad shoulders. "Just don't look down and keep singing if you get scared." The descent was slow and careful, with Luis testing each foothold before trusting his weight to it. The twins clung to him like little monkeys, softly humming their mother's hymn. When they finally reached the bottom, Chester waited patiently where Luis had left him. Luis lifted the girls onto the mule's back, wrapping them snugly in blankets from his saddlebags. As they started down the trail toward Silvervale, the morning sun struck the ridge behind them. Far in the distance, A thin column of smoke still rose from the remains of Louisa's cabin. "Your house is all gone," Lila said sadly, noticing the smoke. "Just wood and nails," Louis replied, patting her knee. "What matters is right here with me." He touched the Bible in his saddlebag, where Sarah's letter lay safe. "Sometimes the Lord has to burn away the old to make room for new blessings." Annie leaned forward to hug his shoulders. "Are we your new blessings, Mr. Pike?" "That you are, child." Louis smiled, feeling tears prick his eyes again. "That you surely are." They rode on through the sparkling morning, 3 voices raised in song, their shadows stretching before them down the snowy trail. Behind them, the smoke from Louise's old life drifted away on the wind, while ahead lay Silvervale and whatever grace God had in store for their newfound family. Marshal Colton's boots thundered across the wooden sidewalk as he approached Sloane's office, flanked by 2 deputies. Inside, the railroad agent sat at his polished desk, pen hovering over papers as the lawmen entered. "Edwin Sloane," the marshal's voice rang with authority. "You're under arrest for arson and criminal fraud." Sloane's face drained of color. "This is preposterous. I demand nothing." Marshal Colton slapped a pair of iron handcuffs on the desk. "We have sworn testimony about your men setting Pike's cabin ablaze, plus evidence of forged documents bearing his name." Louis stepped into the doorway, the twins' Bible clutched in his weathered hands. Behind him stood Pastor Abbott and 3 miners who'd witnessed the fire. Annie and Lila watched from the mission porch across the street, gripping each other's hands. "The truth's got a way of coming to light," Louis said quietly, opening the Bible to Sarah's letter. "Even if it takes years." Within the hour, Sloane sat in a cell while Louis presented his evidence to Judge Parker in the courthouse. The small room filled with townspeople as Louis spoke of finding the twins, discovering the forged deed, and the night his cabin burned. "And this letter," Louis held up Sarah's faded pages, "shows God's hand in bringing these children to my care." The judge studied the documents, his weathered face thoughtful. "The railroad's claim is based on forged papers," he declared finally. "I hereby invalidate the deed." He turned to Louis. "As for the Turner girls, given the circumstances and community support shown here today, I grant you full guardianship, Mr. Pike." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Annie and Lila rushed forward to hug Louise's legs, while Mrs. Hanley dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Pastor Abbott rose from his seat, clearing his throat. "If I may, Your Honor, our community has witnessed something remarkable here. Not just justice served, but hearts changed." He gestured to the gathered townspeople. "I propose we rebuild Louise's cabin, larger and stronger, as a home for orphaned children of all races, a testament to the mercy that brought these little ones to us." "The church can contribute funds," Mrs. Turnbull called out. "My miners will donate labor," added Mr. Henderson, the mine owner. "We've got strong backs and willing hands." One by one, people stepped forward with offers of lumber, nails, food for workers, and wages set aside. Louise stood silent, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. "Well then," Judge Parker smiled, "let the record show this court fully supports the establishment of such a home, with Mr. Pike as its rightful guardian." As winter gave way to spring, the mountainside echoed with the sounds of construction. Where Louisa's old cabin had stood, a new structure rose day by day. Miners and merchants worked alongside each other, sharing tools and meals. Women from town brought baskets of bread and stew, while children gathered stones for the foundation. The new cabin took shape slowly but surely, 2 stories tall, with broad windows and a wide porch. Inside, the main room centered around a massive stone fireplace, with smaller rooms branching off for sleeping quarters. Louis worked alongside his neighbors, his heart full as he watched Annie and Lila make friends with other children who came to watch the building grow. "It's like a big family," Annie observed one evening, as they sat on the half-finished porch sharing cornbread with the workers. "All these people helping." "That's exactly what it is," Luis agreed, watching the sunset paint the valley gold. "Family isn't just blood. It's the people God brings into your life when you need them most." Lila leaned against his arm, humming softly. "Like Mama brought us to you." "And like you brought the town together," Pastor Abbott added, settling beside them. "God works in mysterious ways, but always toward healing." As spring flowers dotted the mountainside, the new cabin, christened Pike Home for Lost Lambs at Lila's suggestion, stood complete. Its fresh-cut timber glowed in the sunlight, smoke curling from the chimney like a welcome sign. Inside, beds waited for children who needed shelter, while outside, a garden sprouted under Annie's careful tending. Luis hung Sarah's letter in a frame by the front door, her words a daily reminder of God's providence. Below it, he carved a simple phrase into the door frame: "Amazing Grace." The twins had the biggest room upstairs, with a window facing the sunrise. Each night their prayers and songs drifted down to the main room, where Luis sat by the fire, his heart full of gratitude for the family he'd found and the community that had embraced them all. Early summer warmed the San Juan Mountains, painting the slopes in vibrant shades of green. Wild columbines dotted the meadows around the newly rebuilt cabin, their purple and white blooms nodding in the gentle breeze. The fresh-cut pine boards of the structure gleamed golden in the morning light, a testament to the community's united effort. Luis stood on the wide porch, carefully securing a wooden sign he and the twins had carved together over the past week. The letters, though simple, carried deep meaning. Pike Home for Lost Lambs. Annie had insisted on adding little lambs at each corner, which Luis had carved with patient detail while Lila traced the letters with her small fingers. The dedication ceremony drew folks from all across Silvervale Valley. Quilts spread across the grass held picnic baskets and lemonade, while children played tag between the trees. Pastor Abbott stood near the porch steps, his Bible open as he prepared to bless the home. Mrs. Turnbull arranged wildflowers in tin cans along the porch rail, humming softly. The marshal and his wife brought fresh-baked bread, its warm scent mixing with the pine-sweet air. Even the miners had cleaned up proper for the occasion, their usually dusty clothes brushed neat and clean. As the pastor began speaking about God's providence and mercy, Annie tugged gently at Luis's sleeve. He knelt beside her, his weathered face soft with affection. "Pa," she whispered, her eyes bright with hope, "can we keep singing Mama's song here?" The simple question caught Luis's heart. Without words, he gathered both girls into his arms, holding them close as tears filled his eyes. These precious children, sent to him through storm and grief, had brought him back to life. Pastor Abbott noticed the moment and smiled knowingly. "Perhaps we should all join in the hymn that brought this family together," he suggested. The congregation's voices rose clear and strong, the familiar melody carrying across the valley that had witnessed so much change. Annie and Lila's sweet voices led the way, just as they had that snowy night when Luis first heard them beneath the fallen pine. As the song ended, Luis remained on his knees, one arm around each girl. Their small hands patted his shoulders with the natural comfort of true family. The mission bells chimed in the distance, their clear tones ringing across the valley like a blessing. Twilight painted the sky in soft purples and golds. Most folks had headed home, leaving behind the peaceful quiet of evening. Luis stood at the porch rail, gazing at the first stars appearing above the mountains. The twins had fallen asleep on a quilt near the fireplace, their faces peaceful in the flickering light. "Sarah," he whispered to his wife's memory, his voice gentle with wonder. "You were right all along. God does answer prayers, just not how we expect." He watched the mission bells catch the last light. But his way brings more blessing than we could imagine. Inside the cabin, the firelight cast warm shadows on the walls. Hope, which had laid frozen in Luis's heart, for so long, now lived and breathed in this place of refuge. In the gentle sounds of the girls' sleeping breaths, in the lingering echo of hymns, in the promise of mercy yet to come, Luis found his lasting peace. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.